Hello and welcome back to the AI Ethics Now podcast. My name is Tom Ritchie and I'm really pleased today to be joined by Lizbeth Chandler, an innovation lead in the global operations team for Accenture. Lizbeth is also an agentic AI expert and one of the top 50 people in AI ethics globally. Lizbeth, hello.
Hi everyone.
It's brilliant to have you with us. I wonder, Lizbeth, what brings you to this conversation on AI ethics, please?
So for all our listeners, I actually have a background in three different areas. So I'm a bit of a tribrid. I did computer science, law and sustainability, and business, both in theory and practice. So went to uni, but also have actually actionalized it in industry. And this was significantly influential into my debut, if you like, into AI ethics, because it is sort of within that trifecta of all three of those. But what some people don't often know is that I was involved in the sphere of AI ethics a long time before that, but from a user point of view. So I have autism, and as it's a disability from my kind of day to day. And I grew up in a household of inventors. So particularly my older brother, who's 18 years older than me and was doing AI back when I was born in 2000s and late 90s. And he made an adaptive AAC board with a very simple AI that was time-based to help me communicate and get back into school. So I grew up with the concept of accessible tech and AI ethics feeding into that as a normal concept within my household. So yeah, came from I guess a grounded reality rather than a specific intention to engage in AI ethics. And then when I started Good Robot Company, which was the startup I ran during university, we weren't trying to create kind of the next unicorn startup, but we were responding to something that was missing within the ecosystem. And a lot of the tools at the time were just focused on model drift. And I was like, there's so much more we can do here, which is how I got into AI ethics.
Thank you for sharing your story. I think the point about accessible tech is a really important one, and it's interesting to hear about how your brother was using this technology a long time ago to help you, and how you've kind of taken that forward in how you're trying to innovate and make the world a better place. You straddle a really interesting space in kind of academia and industry. And I wonder, how did you identify the need for these ethical AI solutions when you founded the Good Robot Company?
Well, as I mentioned, there were a lot of big players. Like IBM had IBM Watson, and there were several tools already that existed that kind of looked at it from a laboratory standpoint of, okay, well, here we have like model drift, therefore it's bias, and they didn't look at the socio-technical side. The interesting author who and academic that I was significantly interested in, and my first year at uni particularly, was social systems theory, and Nicholas Luhmann. He was a German sociologist, actually. But he created the systems thinking view as self-referential systems that communicate internally using their own codes. And I was like, oh, immediately this has application to AI bias. And I could kind of see between, again, this technical and social side here. Because a system, like, for example, Law AI, constructs its own reality based on how it selects and processes information. It shapes what it sees and what it ignores, and bias is a product of that systemic process, basically. He argued that these social systems, though, don't reflect reality, they just construct it. And they do this by selecting, taking information based on these internal codes. And in a similar way, in AI systems, we filter the world through the logic of past success. So from a practical lens, you use features at Islam to associate, for example, with employability if you're using a HR case. And the issue then isn't bad data, because the data might actually be fine. It's the fact the system had no internal mechanism to reflect on the filtering logic of kind of a non-bias or like a bias-conscious society, which is what I then saw the gap in trying to do. So our product was based on counterfactual analysis, where you essentially take a protective characteristic, and if you change it, you look at whether it changes the overall outcome, and then you run that 100,000 times with all the rest being the same, and understand if there's kind of a line of bias represented from that. The great thing about this, though, and why it was industry applicable and why it got so much traction so quickly was, one, it was quite quick for us to do, improve, and implement and get user feedback to very quickly. Because from a technical aspect, it wasn't, we weren't trying to create the next IBM Watson. We were trying to fit a very small gap in a lot of other different tools that were already out there. And the other thing that was helpful is that it works with black box systems, because you just need to know the input and the output, which helps as well, because many organizations, of course, won't share what models they're using and what their architecture is, because that's massively confidential information. But we wanted to look at the socio-technical aspect of it, which seemingly no other company was doing.
Fantastic. And I think a really interesting way of thinking about using AI and being able to detect that kind of biases in there by just changing that one characteristic in the searches you're using. I wondered, did you have any challenges trying to convince different stakeholders of the importance of the work of what you were doing?
I think, well, bit of context, we started in Cornwall, which is not the most typical place for an AI startup, Exeter's campus in Cornwall. And I'll talk a little bit about the journey, but we ended up in Y Combinator we had a significant journey. But at the start, when we took it to the council, we didn't consider actually that people might be at very, very different levels of understanding, because a lot of organizations, some of them were using this technology without kind of even having kind of the literacy and the understanding of how AI works, let alone the ethics side. So you need to take the stakeholders on journeys to actually translate, first of all, the foundation before you get into the nuance. So that was our first learning, and a bit of a tip for anyone else trying to create their own startup or inventions to then scale, is you need to get that communication journey really established. I think the other one is there was a bit of a concern that, particularly when we did the young innovators, our champion was like, but why will companies buy it? Because they don't want to know that they're biased. So why would they kind of say like, oh yeah, we've been using this company to identify all our biases? Because partly they thought ignorance was bliss, in their opinion. But that actually differed. We did some research. It actually differed from a lot of the organization stakeholders that we were working with. And they considered that AI ethics was not just as well an add-on, but actually part of their core responsibilities and foundations as a company. So while we were running all that startup, we had to sort of question our biases ourselves in what we thought stakeholders needed and what we thought their position was. Don't underestimate the power of your own network and the importance of building relationships with other academics in that field and other industry people within that field. Because actually what you'll find is not only can you have more diversity and kind of more collaborations too, but actually that you can do solutions that, for example, help other organizations too that are trying to grow in that startup space, like with accessible tech. So I think, know your stakeholder, understand where the communications comes from, and check the bias of what they prioritize, because actually it can be more positive than you think.
And I think your point about being able to tell an interesting story to bring people with you is one that, particularly in the space of AI and AI ethics, at least in the spaces that I'm working, that is really important, where here's how it increases access. If used in some ways, lead to greater equity for student opportunity as well. And it's interesting as well, thinking about the role that you do now and the importance of stories. I wonder if you could give any thought to if there's any difference in approaches to AI ethics between your startup work with the Good Robot Company and more established corporations that you work for now, like Accenture or anyone else that you work with. And do you think there's anything that each sector could learn from each other around AI ethics?
Yeah, massively. I think actually this is where consultancies kind of really thrive, is that you build up expertise from an industry basis, and you just have also a huge scale of industry experts. Keep in mind, when we were running Good Robot, we had kind of 11 people at our sort of peak, and that it's a small group, especially back in 2020, when working in AI ethics and AI bias detection was a relatively niche area. And I went around schools and I said, I'm doing a talk of AI ethics, and this is my job now, and this is my job title as an AI ethicist. And they were like, wow, these are the jobs of the future. But and then I joined Accenture, and they were like, yeah, we have an entire department dedicated to it. We casually have, integrated across all our offerings. And like, it's a very different scale that you're looking at. You also, from a partnership point of view, they can leverage so much more. Like Accenture, for example, partner with the World Economic Forum to help build responsible AI toolkits. They've also got a strong emphasis and loads of external reports, by the way, if you just Google it, on like AI maturity and from compliance to confidence report. I think that was back in December 2024. It's having so many more individuals as well that you can talk to and build ideas on, and that also helps because you find that you can take what's worked well and help scale out to a bigger movement. And just how responsive they were to my ideas and what I've learned from Good Robot. When I joined Accenture, I thought, oh, they're a big organization. They're not going to really care about anything that one person out of 860,000 odd, does in AI ethics. And I managed in my first 2 months to get on a call with our chief legal officer and like chief AI officer, talking about some new approaches we could do, and they were so receptive to it. So checking some of my own assumptions was kind of important there, but I just think having that scale is like a huge difference, but also a massive benefit that you get working in a large company.
Thanks, Lizbeth. I think it's really interesting to hear about how your experiences in your startup translated into Accenture, and actually how the barriers that you kind of initially thought would be there actually weren't. And there was this incredible openness to new ideas and new ways of thinking, particularly about AI ethics. And I wonder, you mentioned earlier in the podcast your kind of predisposition to getting things done and doing things and coming up with kind of concrete outcomes. You've mentioned that you worked on AI bias analytics and detection services with things that you've done previously. I wonder if you could share any examples of how you've turned ethical principles into concrete technical solutions, please.
A great one is our main bias detection product in Good Robot when we did that, which was the Good Robot Bias Detection. It's a catchy name, right? And that was that counterfactual analysis side. I think it was the most stressful 5 weeks of my life, though. I've never quite cried over making a POC as I did in that. They call it the Valley of Sorrow on the innovation diagram when you're in the startup world. And we were mid-YC. And like week by week, they were like, we expect you guys to have a product by like week 3. Come on, everyone. And being like the one CTO going, does anyone else have expertise in this entire like regional area, please? In AI ethics was really was difficult. But we got some data. The first run was CV scanning for recruitment. AI, mostly because there's so much of it open source as well. There's a lot of models which are specifically made for CV scanning that we could test. And then previously, a lot of it pertains to accessible tech I've made for myself. So, for example, I made a part of like a home organization robot that like analyzes my routine. And it uses similar principles where it's not just recording me constantly because I felt really uncomfortable with updating that data, but actually uses similar mechanisms to animation triggers and like animation rigging to then track movements and associate that with what that means. And then I get a nice little like pattern recognition of, oh, you're burning out, or like, oh, you should assess this on your mental health because that's not so good. I struggled with that introspection because of my autism, so I made a robot to help. But again, like another way of AI ethics where I was like, oh, accidentally I solved part of the computer privacy problem that you normally get with computer vision, and that was sort of a byproduct of making a tech that I thought would just be helpful for not burning out so much.
And I think that sounds like such an interesting tool that we would benefit from, particularly in the context with the students that I'm working with and teaching. Is your kind of description of this robot that you built to support you with kind of your emotional well-being and not burning out. That's what an amazing use, of AI technology that could translate to so many different contexts. We talk so much at universities about, or could we use custom GPTs to almost like either triage or counseling support? And there's so many challenges that come with that. But your description of what you're creating and then being able to reduce some of the challenges of privacy is a really interesting one. And I think with that in mind, the way that we're thinking about AI, perhaps in an education space, you've led a lot of STEM events for different school groups, whether it's talking about ethical or accessible tech and the work that you've done. And I wonder, how do you think we can better prepare the next generation of students and then those who've graduated to think critically about AI ethics?
I love this question. I do several kind of school and then university events a year just because I think there's so much we can benefit from connecting the industry side to academia. I think part of it would be to leverage your interdisciplinary skills. I am in the unique position, but like hopefully not unique in the future, by the way, listeners. Please take note, because more jobs are turning up like this, where they say, actually, we don't need a tech person or a business person. We need someone who can navigate both and do navigate the in-betweens, whether it's lower end business or in business and then like a niche aspect of technology. Having some interdisciplinary aspect not only helps it from like your future job prospects, but is also massively in industry demand, because AI, when it's done well, is often quite narrow, but it struggles taking and balancing that interdisciplinary aspects. So if you want kind of a more like not AI proof, but AI leveraging like career, I would say definitely try and build some interdisciplinary skills, even if it's through practice rather than theory. Even better, perhaps. So, for example, I actually worked in pipeline industrial engineering. So, like looking at how we can make oil pipelines to hydrogen and green hydrogen pipelines. And that was, yeah, a super cool aspect. But by doing so, I actually then went deeper into the industry expertise of energy too. So, like more interdisciplinary, this is what I would recommend. The other one is balance taking in all the new ideas of everything that's happening in the innovation industry as a whole. So all these new releases every week about, by the way, we're using human stem cells and brain cells now to create AI, for example. The continuous flood of information about, by the way, we've made this, or this university has discovered this, and this is why you need to be concerned about your future. Do try and like barrier yourself a little bit from it emotionally, because that resilience is, and the emotional resilience side is going to be key. But also there are good ideas, but they don't often and always scale. So the scaling part is the hardest part, and that's the thing that I really encourage you to delve more interest in and understand how you can build a career in supporting that, because it's great to have inventions, and as someone who is an inventor and has loads of ideas, most of which come to fruition, the scale side's really important, because that's where you get your impact and that's where you're able to actually make a difference. And that's actually where curriculums can sometimes drive focus away from, because they focus all about startups. Oh, you should be an entrepreneur, it's great, by the way, here's how large businesses operate, and there's no in between. And actually teaching yourself, how do I navigate a large company? How do I influence change in a large company? If I want a large company to be sustainable, how can I as an individual help do that and help innovate that company in a way to do so? A great example recently was, I was talking with another academic about green jobs, and she was like, oh, I've been telling my students about these green jobs. I said, well, every job should be a green job. It's just about how we innovate the current roles to do so. So, for example, take AI architecture designer, not necessarily a green job, until you put that green lens on it and think, okay, actually, how do we optimize then the way that we build these technologies to be more environmentally friendly? So there's a, a lens, I think, that isn't really being kind of capitalized on not just focusing on the kind of the narrow what exists today, but what we need, where those gaps are, where roles don't necessarily exist at the moment, but they can be adapted into, in order to not only create a better future, but also different and new jobs that will last.
For quite a lot of what you were saying, I had a big smile, because your description of interdisciplinarity and the need to come at this challenge from as many different lenses as possible is something that myself and my colleague Jenny, who this podcast was part of a module that we developed. It was entirely intended to be an interdisciplinary approach to the challenge of AI ethics, and recognizing that you can't just fix this from a business perspective or a legal perspective, but you need your philosophers, your historians, you need everyone in that room to be able to help develop new ways of thinking and understanding. And I think your second point as well is a really crucial one, about teaching people to not just create startups, but what's next, what comes after that space. Because as you say, you can't go from being a startup to being a multi-billion-pound organization overnight. There will be a bridge between those two things. And that need to focus there is something that, with another hat on, when I teach students about innovation and entrepreneurship, has made me really think, oh, actually, are we teaching them the right thing, or do we need to go beyond the here's how you do a startup. Anyway, good luck. So thank you. Really, really, really great to hear those answers.
And there was a second bit on how do we encourage students to think critically about AI ethics. I would say think about how AI ethics is changing and how it's influenced your own experiences. So, for example, we have the incoming era of embodied AI upon us and autonomous AI. So, like if you look at, for example, even it from a standards point of view, what we find.
But thinking about your kind of really broad range of experiences from across startups and in your current corporate environment and in education with your PhD and continued work in academia, what practical steps do you think we can take to ensure a positive future with AI, please?
I would say that consider the diverse individuals within society and not just in your hyper localized area. Like often we take, you can take a kind of very westernized approach of not only AI impact, but AI development and deployment. I think we need to be better at looking through a kind of global lens when we consider AI overall and actually what we can do as well when we can collaborate together across that global scale. You mentioned an interesting point of drawing from my experience across startups, corporate environments, and education. Having individuals that connect those different planes of existence really crucial because it's moving at such a pace we can't afford to wait for like the 7-year-old lag between kind of academia to industry and industry to academia or vice versa. And having genuine collaborations rather than transactional ones is really kind of important for that because it's a symbiotic relationship, right? You're not just benefiting one another, but you're also benefiting curriculum in the future there. From an individual perspective, don't underestimate the power of your voice and your ideas to impact the positive futures of what you can do with AI. Whether it's something in the realms of accessibility, whether it's something in the realms of ethics, or whether it's just a gap in legislation that you can see. Even if it's just a group of encouragement while you're on this journey, especially in education, it's an amazingly positive source to do that to help you. And that becomes important from, I think, a character perspective as you enter this world of AI. For context, I graduated my kind of like main undergraduate only in 2023 June. So, post COVID, post AI entering the marketplace as well, mostly. Like, I speak from experience when I do say it is tough out there. So, you need to be tough and show resilience and build that up in your character and what you can do. Working together and utilizing the ideas that students have and not underestimating the impact that student ideas can actually bring to industry today. And not underestimating the voice and the power of existing technology, I think. So being able to not only be familiar but have literacy to navigate this, even if you're not specialized it, is super crucial because that's how you can also have a voice in creating a more positive future with AI. And then in my final point, it would be remembering that technology is never neutral. It reflects the choices, the values, the blind spots of who build it and where we build together. So a hopeful future means designing AI that doesn't just optimize for efficiency, but actually uplifts the human ingenuity, our dignity, it cultivates trust and expands those opportunities.
Thank you so much for your time today and giving some really interesting answers. And I really love that you occupy this, I almost want to say third space, because that's how we talk about it in an academic context, but you're in a different space again, where you're trying to tie together these really kind of different elements of corporate life, startup, of academia and other things that you're working on, particularly in the context of accessible AI and AI ethics. So thank you so much, and really looking forward to collaborating with you again on things in future. Have a lovely rest of the day and speak to you very soon. Thanks so much.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.